Stand up for Britain. Labour ripped to shreds on GB News as Tory MP brands party a joke. You know you're having an absolute shocker when a former security minister goes on live television and calls your government wimps, spineless, gutless, and suggests you're either willfully ignorant or completely stupid. And those aren't tabloid headlines or Twitter hot takes. Those are direct quotes from Tom Tugendhat, Conservative MP and former security minister, absolutely eviscerating Labour on GB News over their China policy. We're talking about a politician who spent years dealing with actual national security threats, telling the current government they're not just getting it wrong, they're catastrophically selling out British interests to make themselves look good to Beijing. Welcome to UK Political Insight, where we watch senior politicians deliver the kind of verbal destruction that makes reality TV look tame. And today, we're diving into Tugendhat's scorching takedown of Labour's China policy, why he thinks Rachel Reeves's Beijing trip was pathetic, and what it means when a former security minister essentially says the government is either stupid or deliberately ignoring threats. Spoiler alert, this isn't just political point scoring. This is genuine fury about national security being compromised, and it's absolutely brutal. Right, let's set the context, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. On Wednesday, Defense Minister Luke Pollard announced the government needed more time to reflect on the planning application for a new Chinese super embassy in Tower Hamlets because of the complexities of the national security implications, which is politicians speak for, "Oh God, we didn't think this through and now everyone's yelling at us about security concerns, so we need to stall for time." The decision is now supposedly due on December 10th, which gives them a bit of breathing room to figure out how to get out of this mess. And it's absolutely a mess because MI5 has alerted parliamentarians, Whitehall officials, and Westminster staffers that they could become potential targets in an alleged Chinese spy operation. So Britain's domestic intelligence service is literally warning government employees that China is actively trying to recruit them or compromise them. And simultaneously, the government is considering approving the largest Chinese embassy in Europe. You couldn't write a more obvious conflict if you tried. Enter Tom Tugendhat on Britain's Newsroom with Andrew Pierce and Miriam Cates, and from the first words out of his mouth, you know this is going to be good. He said, "This is not the way to run a country, particularly when we know that our enemies, China, Russia, and Iran, are trying to do us really serious harm. Enemies, not competitors, not strategic rivals. Enemies." That's the word choice of someone who wants absolutely no ambiguity about what he thinks China represents. Current Security Minister Dan Jarvis had said the government was edging towards a decision and that it would be made in a quasi-judicial capacity, which is meant to sound serious and impartial. And Tugendhat's response? Rubbish. Not "I disagree" or "that's questionable," just flat out rubbish. And then he delivered what might be the most quotable demolition of government policy this year. He said, "Stand up for Britain. Tell us what's in our interests and actually defend it. Do you really think that it's in our interest to have the Tower of London, that great symbol of English independence, going all the way back, in a way, to the Romans, but really to William the Conqueror, overshadowed by a Chinese embassy?" Now, this is brilliant rhetoric because he's not just talking about security concerns or intelligence threats. He's making it visceral and symbolic. The Tower of London, this ancient fortress that represents British history and sovereignty, being overshadowed by a massive Chinese facility. It's the kind of image that sticks in people's minds. It's not abstract threat assessment. It's, do you really want this symbol of foreign power looming over one of our most iconic landmarks? And then Tugendhat asks a genuinely devastating question. What kind of a message do you think that sends to people who want to invest in the UK? This is smart because it takes away Labour's main argument for engaging with China, which is economic benefit. Tugendhat is saying, you think this makes Britain look like a good place to invest? You think businesses around the world see Britain rolling over for Beijing and think, yes, that's a stable, principled place to put my money. It's economic logic turned against the government's own supposed rationale. But he wasn't done. Oh no, he was just getting warmed up. He continued, "If you really, really think it's in our interest, go out there. Be proud to say it. If you don't, you're a wimp. They're all too weak, too spineless, and too gutless." Wimp, spineless, gutless. These aren't the kind of words you usually hear in political discourse. This is someone absolutely fed up with what he sees as cowardice from the government. And then he really twisted the knife. Frankly, they should make decisions if they don't want to make a decision. Get out of the way and stop pretending you're in charge. Hand it over to the judges and the bureaucrats. This is basically saying if you're not going to actually govern, if you're not going to make tough decisions about national interest, then stop pretending to be the government. Step aside and let someone else do it. That's not criticism. That's contempt. Tugendhat then moved on to why he thinks labor is being so weak on China, and his theory is straightforward. They're desperate for a trade deal and they don't want to offend Beijing. He specifically went after Rachel Reeves and her trip to China, and this is where it gets properly savage. He said, "You saw Rachel Reeves and her absolutely pathetic trip to Beijing. She came back with a promise of £600 million of investment over 5 years. That's $120 million a year. I mean, seriously, it's a joke." Pathetic. That's his assessment of the Chancellor's diplomatic mission. And then he does the math for everyone, breaking down that this supposedly impressive investment is actually $120 million a year, which in the context of Britain's economy is essentially pocket change. For context, Britain's GDP is over £2 trillion. $120 million is a rounding error. And for this, according to Tugendhat, Reeves is scraping and crawling to Beijing? He continued, "She looks pathetic, and she looks pathetic because she can't add up. She doesn't understand values, and she's not willing to defend our country. She's in the wrong job." Can't add up, doesn't understand values, won't defend the country. Wrong job. That's a comprehensive character assassination of the Chancellor in 4 short sentences. And the thing is, Tugendhat isn't some random backbencher. He's a former security minister. He knows what the threats are. When he says the government isn't defending the country, that carries weight. Now, Miriam Cates made a fair point during the interview. She pointed out that the warmth towards China actually began in 2010 under David Cameron and George Osborne. So conservatives can't exactly claim clean hands here. They were the ones who started the golden era of UK-China relations. They were the ones who welcomed Chinese investment with open arms. So isn't it a bit rich for Tugendhat to be criticizing labor for something their own party initiated? And to his credit, Tugendhat had an answer. He explained that something big changed in 2013, when Xi Jinping consolidated power, bringing a new, more aggressive tone to Chinese policy. He said, "Now, personally, I've always been extremely cautious of China and the CCP because I'm always very, very wary of communists and dictatorships. The reality is that Beijing in 2010 was not Beijing in 2020, and the bets that were made then, they were reasonable." This is actually a fair historical point. China under Hu Jintao was authoritarian but relatively cautious. China under Xi Jinping has been far more aggressive, both domestically in crushing dissent and internationally in asserting power. Hong Kong is the obvious example. In 2010, Hong Kong still had some autonomy. Now it's completely crushed. So the argument that circumstances changed isn't entirely self-serving spin. But then Tugendhat delivered his knockout blow. The bets that this government is making in 2025, after 15 years of lessons, are frankly extraordinary. They suggest either willful ignorance or complete stupidity, but they do not suggest a government that is actually responding to the will and interests of the British people. Willful ignorance or complete stupidity. That's the choice Tugendhat is offering. Either Labour knows about the threats and is ignoring them, which is willful ignorance, or they don't understand the threats, which is stupidity. There's no third option in his analysis where the government is making informed, rational decisions. It's one of 2 forms of incompetence. The timing of all this is particularly awkward for Labour because MI5's warning about Chinese espionage operations isn't theoretical. It's happening right now. Chinese operatives are actively trying to recruit and compromise British officials, and the government is considering approving a massive new Chinese embassy in London. The optics are catastrophic. It's like your security alarm going off warning of intruders, and your response is to open more doors. The Tower of London imagery that Tugendhat used is also politically potent because it appeals to British historical identity. The tower represents sovereignty, resistance, British independence. Having it overshadowed by a Chinese embassy is symbolically offensive to people who care about British identity and history. It's not just about security, it's about what kind of country Britain is and wants to be. The Stand Up for Britain framing is also clever because it makes this about patriotism rather than just policy disagreement. Tugendhat isn't just saying Labour's policy is wrong on technical grounds, he's saying they're failing to defend Britain's interests. They're being weak. They're letting Britain be pushed around by a hostile power. That's emotionally powerful in a way that technical policy